Today, we are diving into a story that, honestly, sounds like a punchline, but it turns out to be a really high-stakes power play with some surprisingly deep historical roots. So let's get into it. This is the Greenland Gambit.
I know, a strange place to start, right? A Bee Gees song, but stick with me, because this line, it perfectly captures what we're talking about today. An idea that sounds so absurd it must be a joke, but one that has the potential to make the whole world, well, pretty uneasy.
And that really is the central question here, isn't it? When the President of the United States talks about buying Greenland, is it just some bizarre throwaway comment, or is it a calculated move in a much, much bigger game? A game where the joke, as the song goes, might be on someone else entirely.
Okay, so let's start with the event that dragged all of this back into the headlines in the first place.
A year ago, President Trump brought up his desire to purchase Greenland again. Now, this was an idea that was pretty much laughed off when he first floated it, but it's one of those ideas that once you put it out there, it just refuses to go away.
But here's the kicker. This is not a new idea. Not even close. In fact, it's part of a long-standing American ambition in the Arctic, with a history that goes way, way further back than you might think.
You know, American interest in Greenland goes back over 150 years, kicking off right after the U.S. bought Alaska. Then, there was a formal offer to buy it in 1946. And, maybe most importantly, a secret military pact was signed in 1951 that grants the U.S. military rights there, to this very day. And we're not talking about some casual inquiry back in 1946. No, the Truman administration literally put $100 million in gold bullion on the table. Denmark said no, but it just goes to show you how serious the U.S. was, even way back then. So what this means is America already has a serious military foothold there. The Putavik base is active, and because that 1951 agreement was never canceled, the U.S. could, with a polite phone call, reestablish other bases that were shut down after the Cold War.
So what about the other big players? How are they reacting to all this? Well, let's just say Russia seems to be thoroughly enjoying the show.
To really get Moscow's reaction, you need to understand this one word: schadenfreude. It's that feeling of pleasure you get from watching someone else's misfortune. And from where Russia is sitting, the West is in a very, very awkward position.
And this slide just illustrates it perfectly. For years, Moscow has been hammered by criticism for its actions in Ukraine. So, from their point of view, watching the United States make a blatant land grab on the territory of a NATO ally, well, that is a spectacle of hypocrisy they just can't help but enjoy.
But amidst all this geopolitical chess, what about the people who actually live there? Let's switch gears and look at this from the perspective of Greenland itself.
I mean, we're talking about a self-governing island of just 57,000 people. The population is mostly Inuit, and there's this deep, long-standing resentment of Danish colonization. And that resentment, it fuels a really powerful movement for independence. In fact, a staggering 85% of the population wants a complete break from Denmark. They want to be their own country. But, and this is a really critical point, that desire to leave Denmark does not translate into a desire to join the United States. Not at all. In fact, the numbers are just as decisive in the other direction. It's around the same proportion, about 85%, that completely disdains the idea of being forcibly turned into Americans. They want independence, not just to trade one colonial power for another.
So you can imagine the bizarre position this puts Denmark in. For decades, they've been described as a loyal, almost subservient ally of the U.S., even fighting in wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. And now, suddenly, they find themselves the target of their powerful friend's ambitions. It's got to be disorienting.
And zooming out even further, this awkwardness extends to the entire European Union, which, you might be surprised to learn, finds itself pretty powerless in this whole situation.
In the face of all this American pressure, even threats of tariffs, the EU's response has been described as basically a whimper. So why so quiet?
Well, the argument is that for decades, Europe has essentially outsourced its security to the United States through NATO. And that long-term dependency means that when its protector suddenly goes rogue, Europe doesn't really have the independent strength or maybe even the will to push back in any meaningful way.
So, here's the crucial takeaway. This isn't just a presidential whim. The real stakes here are absolutely enormous. As the Arctic ice melts, new shipping lanes are opening up. Greenland also happens to hold these vast, untapped deposits of rare earth minerals, the stuff that's essential for all our modern technology. This is a play for strategic and economic dominance of the future Arctic. Which brings us back one last time to that song. The final line talks about an end that allows for a new beginning. And it kind of forces you to ask, right, what old order might have to die? Old alliances, old dependencies, for a new geopolitical reality to emerge in the Arctic.
And that leaves us with one final thought. The whole thing started looking like a joke at one man's expense. But when you look at the deep history, the geopolitical embarrassment, and the massive resources at stake, you really have to ask yourself, in the Greenland Gambit, who is the punchline really on?